everybody. This is Rudy Ragman, and over here on Stage 3, you are listening to the Pantheon Podcast Network. Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre, the interview edition. It's always monumental when there's an interview. That's why I do that. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. This is Season 6, Episode 5 of Music is Not a Genre. It's kind of a banner episode because it represents 3 different sub-series. For those of you scoring at home, this is Interview Edition number 34. But it's also a book talk. It's book talk number 8. And, sad to say but true, it's also Death is Dumb, Volume 14. And you'll understand why when we get into the subject here. I have a special interview guest who those of you who are watching and not just listening can already see, who wrote a book about Eddie Van Halen. But before we get to that, just a reminder, anyone who wants to see the bonus video that accompanies any of the episodes that I do, you go to patreon.com/music is not a genre. This week's bonus video is my take on Van Halen, their career, their music. Pretty obvious one considering the source material. So with me today is Steve Rosen. He is a legendary rock journalist who's been doing it for 50 years. He's the author of several books, including the book we're discussing today, TONECHASER, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen. And I'll put the link and all of that stuff because I just finished reading the book last week. And I honestly can't say enough about it, but we'll get to that. First, let's get to Steve. Steve, how are you today?
Great, Nick. Great. Doing really good, man. Happy to be. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being here. You're on the West Coast, right?
I am. I am in Orange County, a little town called Lake Forest, about 25 minutes from Disneyland. Very nice down here.
All right. Nice. Yeah. Nice. So since those of, people on my audience may not know you, a good way to start is why don't you, tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Okay, man, I'll give you the capsule version here. So I actually began writing for my high school newspaper. I continue to freelance, and you get something printed in a little local rag, little newspaper, and that becomes a stepping stone for the next kind of magazine, So I wrote for the Los Angeles Free Press, which is a very hip underground newspaper way back in the day, very political. Then in 73, I started writing for Guitar Player, and that opened a lot of doors because Guitar Player at the time was really the only mag for musicians or for, you to go find out, well, what kind of strings did Jimmy Page use, or what kind of amp was Mick Ronson using? There was no internet. You couldn't go, there weren't like 8 million different sources to find that stuff out.
Yeah.
Wrote for Guitar World for about 6 years. Guitar Player. And that led to like Rolling Stone, and I did some things for Cream and Circus. Ultimately, moved over to Guitar World and wrote for them for about 4 or 5 years, which is where I did 3 cover stories on Edward, which a lot of Van Halen fans now look back at those as kind of, pretty important interviews with Ed, sort of right around 84, 85. Along the way, I'd written some books. I wrote a book in 78 on Jeff Beck, actually the first biography on him, which came out in Japan, in Japanese only. Wrote a book about Sabbath, wrote a book on Free and Bad Company, wrote a book on Randy Rhoads. As the industry changed, magazines sort of, paper magazines became kind of, went the way of the dinosaur, unfortunately, so started doing some stuff online. And, about 3 years ago, thought, or somehow it came to me that, maybe I could write this book on Edward Van Halen that was supposed to happen back in 1985. And I realized I'm jumping back and forth here. In 1985, when I was hanging out with Ed, I had approached him. I said, Edward, I'd like to write your life story. And he goes, yes, you can write it. Nobody else can write it, So I worked on that for several years. That never happened. Our relationship kind of ended in 2003. And for 17 years, I just kind of, thought about it and tried not to think about it, and ultimately thought, you know what, maybe now's the time, and wrote the book. And 14 months later, TONECHASER, screaming, and crying was born.
Wow. So
Yeah.
so just an outpouring, like a 14-month outpouring of putting this book together, right?
That's what it was, man. And I was never the kind of journalist, that was going to say, okay, it's, 12 noon, that's my writing hour, and I'm going to write the next 4 hours. I know a lot of guys have that regimen. I didn't, but I did do it literally, I think, every day for 14 months. And in fact, it wasn't day. If you've read the book, you know about my cat Arpeggio, who would wake me up at 3 a.m.
Yep.
He wanted to be fed. So instead of trying to go back to sleep, which I could never do, I went into my little computer room, and started typing. And, I must have vaguely had the idea of Van Halen on my mind, and I kind of walked away and had sort of like the first paragraph of the intro. And I thought, hey, you know what? This is interesting. This could be something, And yeah, literally that was a routine for 14 months, every single day. I was always afraid if I missed a day, it'd be like, well, I don't want to do it today. I don't want to do it tomorrow. It's like, you got to keep, once you have the tiger by the tail, man, you can't let go. So, yeah.
You're in a groove. I feel that way about exercising. If I miss too many days, I don't want to go back to it,
Man, you are exactly right. And I got to the point where I could not stand going to the gym anymore. So now I kind of take walks outside, but you're right, man. You miss a day at the gym and it's like, forget it. It's over.
Right. So you're doing this, and now I have so many, I read this book a little bit each night over the course of weeks. And it was partly because I wanted to take my time with it. I'll say this: most introductions, especially to nonfiction books, feel a little compulsory to me. They feel like, well, this is my explanation of why I wrote the book, and I just kind of, want to say that and whatever. Your intro was gripping from the moment it started. I mean, just incredible. Like your voice, the voice that carries the book, which I will assume carries many of the other things that you write, is just so compelling, and it's so honest and open and natural, and yet at the same time knowledgeable and literary and all this. Like, you put it all together and you do it right from the beginning.
That is so cool for you to say that, Nick. I mean, you really encapsulated what I was hoping certainly the intro would do, and lead you into the book. And this is kind of what you're going to hear. And you're right, man. I've read enough of those nonfiction books, to know the intro is a throwaway. Typically you don't even read them.
Yeah.
And, I thought, well, this is also a very long intro. Typically it's a couple of pages, but right. Yeah, I kind of wanted to establish that, you talk about the voice. And once I kind of found that, again, it was a difficult book to write. I suppose all books are to all writers, but it's like, okay, I can, the book can kind of lead me now a little bit. I found that voice, and if I can just hang on to it, man. But you really nailed that. That's exactly what I wanted to do, man. I didn't want anything to be throwaway or non-essential, and I wanted you to kind of hear, as a preview what you could expect in the book. So yeah, man, that's exactly what I was hoping people would come away with in that intro, for sure.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And you say that all books are difficult for any writer, right? Because it is an undertaking. But I wonder if, when you said that, setting aside the fact that writing a book and making it, cohesive and something that people can read through and not want to put down and all of that, that's the technical side. But I wonder if part of that difficulty was an emotional difficulty.
At first look, so my relationship with Ed ended in 2003, and I don't want to give the book away. I mean, people may have heard about it, but it was it was not a good ending. It was hurtful to me.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, man, for a lot of years, I tried not to think about Van Halen or Edward Van Halen, and I see they had a record out and they were touring again with Dave. And honestly, man, I tried to compartmentalize that. I didn't want to know about it, and maybe that's selfish or weak or I don't know, but that's the truth. And again, like I mentioned, over the years, I thought about doing a book, and I thought, you know what? I don't, and maybe this is very honest. I didn't want to write a book about Edward. Look, I'm not saying from the standpoint of who he was and what he did, he deserves to have a million books. But I was hurt, and it's like why am I going to sit down and write a book about him? Anyway, that feeling passed. Ultimately, I did sit down and start writing, and it really wasn't until I got into about the fifth chapter, and I started listening to the interviews I had done with him. So as I'm writing, and it's just narrative and just prose, and trying, writing the intro and the first couple chapters, there was no real interview stuff involved. And then I get to that chapter called The First Interview, which was the first interview with a phoner. And as I'm listening to that, I'm taken back to those moments. And even though it was a phoner, I can remember the conversation. And then as the book went on, all the in-person interviews, and those would bring back memories, which I wrote about. And then it got pretty difficult, and I thought, wow, this was really, an amazing time I had with this guy, and I was lucky. And yes, it didn't end, very well, but I wouldn't have traded the experience for anything. So it was hard. And real quickly, so I began the book on August 24th, and I remember that because it was my birthday. And maybe that was a conscious thing, So on October 6th of that year, Edward passes away. So I'm about 4 chapters in. Edward passes away, and I think, wow, what do I do now? Do I stop the book? Do I continue writing? If I continue writing, are people going to think, oh, you're just selfish, man, you just wanted to write a book? Or, and if I don't write the book, I really believed I was failing myself. And so I continued writing, and, you're sitting there, and I'm sitting there in my little room for 14 months, and you're trying to write the best book you possibly can, and you want to move people and touch people, but you really don't know. So, I get done with the book, and I look at it, and I think I've created something, but it was different. It was pretty honest, and I kind of took a very critical look at myself, and I had those little notes sections in there, which I thought, I've never seen anybody do that. Are people going to understand that? Are going to think that's ridiculous? So it was hard for all of those reasons, not just emotionally, but yeah, technically and personally. And, my God, are people going to understand it? Are they going to slam me for some of the things I said about Edward? But yeah, so at the end of the day, I really kind of had to write it for myself. And then, thankfully, everybody thus far has really seemed to dig it, and they understood what I was trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, it comes across as pretty clear to me what you were trying to do, and I have a question about that and the amazing honesty in there. But before I get to that, it's funny. It's interesting you mentioned that. I assumed, because people assume things, that you started writing the book, that you were compelled to write it because he died, but you had started writing it before he died. It's interesting.
That is true. And I know this is going to sound ridiculous, and I don't really believe in the beyond. I hope there's something out there. Yeah, I'm not a spiritual person necessarily. Look, we all knew that Edward was very sick, but this is really weird, man. I don't know. I had a couple dreams that were kind of vaguely about him. Look, again, I'm not trying to be like this deep, mystic crystal ball person, but I knew sooner than later that something was going to happen with Edward. So look, I'm not saying I began the book knowing what was going to happen 6 weeks later, but I don't know what that was. When he did pass away, I was shocked and horrified. And I thought, is that what I was thinking about? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, even in telling you the story, but I did start it before he passed away. You know, I mean, one of my wishes, was that Edward would have still been here when the book was completed. Now, we may not have been on speaking terms, but I hoped he would have known that, hey, Steve wrote this book and I'm not speaking to him anymore, but I know his book is going to be honest. We have those wishes, so that's what I would hope. That's what I would have hoped anyway.
Well, you've blown my head up with questions right now, but it's, I think the one thing that I want to start with is this feeling that you have of hope, and even that kind of, and I don't want to give it away, but there was a sequence at the end that had to do with reconciliation and all of that stuff, and I'd rather people read the book to get there, because it really hits you when you get there. But there was a real feeling of throughout the book, but in particular towards the second half or whatever, that there was a lot of heartbreak in there.
Heartbreak for me?
Yeah, yes, but I will also say that as a reader, I'm getting to know Eddie in a way that I never knew. Like I learned things, I mean, about him as a person, certainly. And you kind of chronicled his development as a person from, his issues with, drugs and all of those things. And just the way that he would handle conflict and whatever, and to where he evolved in a certain way. And one could say even evolved, that evolution took him away from you and maybe other people as well. But throughout that, I'm feeling so now I'm feeling this connection to Eddie, and I will say, and you're right here in front of me, I felt a connection to you too. You to me, you are as much of a character in this book as Eddie is, and that is an absolute plus. That's a huge plus. And I almost think the way you describe certain things, reminds me of that movie from the 80s, Zelig, like you were just there. You were there for so many things over the years, it was this incredible. And so I'm connected to all these, tendrils of what's going on with you and Eddie, and even the honesty that you have about yourself and your thought process, and the mistakes you thought you made, whether they were mistakes or not, just the feelings, and just how raw and really generous you were in sharing all this stuff. So it forges this connection to where whatever heartbreak, and you can answer that yourself, but that you felt or have felt, I was feeling it too.
That is so cool, man. I love that, Nick. Thank you so much. There is a lot of heartbreak in that book. I mean, Ed broke my heart a lot of times, and Edward's own heart was broken. I mean, he went through some major turmoil, and you read about that, and now we know about that turmoil with some of the other members of the band. But when he's telling me these stories, concurrent with their second record being released, and he's telling me these stories, that's like, whoa, my God, he's really. He's unhappy. And with Ed, as I wrote, it's all about respect. And Ed felt disrespected. And that's the worst thing you could do with Edward. There was a lot of heartbreaking moments in the book. Things I experienced with him. There were far more uplifting and amazing moments for sure. But Ed changed. And I tried to understand why that happened and what happened. And, it's hard to put my finger on, but yeah, there was a lot of hurtful moments. And like you said, man, I tried to be as honest as I possibly could without coming off as maudlin or woe is me. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's like you think you know somebody so well, and they say things and do things, and you just simply cannot find any rationale for it at all. So you just kind of back up and accept it. And, you know, which maybe I shouldn't have done. Maybe I could have been more confrontational and, you know, why are you treating me like that, man? Why would you say that to me? You know, how could you believe I would do that? But look, I mean, at the end of the day, the reality is, as much as I was his friend, he's also Edward Van Halen. And, you know, could I have said those things to him? I mean, I probably could have. You know, I just didn't have it in me. I didn't have the chutzpah to say those things to him. You know what I mean?
I don't know who, you know, I'm sure some people would, but I think most people would be deferential to a degree in that dynamic.
Absolutely, man. And I saw, look, I saw band members being deferential. I saw managers being deferential. I saw, you know, other guitar players, I mean, amazing guitar players being deferential. So who was I going to go and you know, hurl these criticisms at him, you know? So, but yeah, man, there is a lot of heartbreak in the book. There really is.
Yeah. It's wow. It's, what I think of when you describe the way, you know, the relationship you had with him, and in particular, how you described it just now, is first of all, how amazing it is that you were able to get that close to him, considering it just started as an interview and it really did evolve into something more than just a professional relationship. But that's someone who's going through the turmoil that he had been going through really his whole life, and in one way or another. I tend to think of, you know, people when I'm really thinking about it in terms of degrees of distance away from me. So the people I feel safest with are the closest to me, and I can handle their storms and you know, and ups and downs or whatever. And then it's varying degrees of distance after that. And the people who to me seem the most erratic and difficult to pin down, or you know, one day they're super up and into you, and the next day they don't want to have anything to do with you, you know, are the ones I keep the furthest distance from, because I never know where I stand with somebody like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm reading a book that's, you know, it's several hundred pages, and it encapsulates decades of experience, but experiencing it in that way over just a period of a few weeks, you know, reading it made me feel like maybe in the macro sense, there was that you were close and then you weren't close. And you know, you thought you were on a certain foothold or standing with him. And then that kind of got slipped out, and your desire, or just that, whether it was professional or personal, to want to keep going back in there and say, well, there's a connection there, and it might be for this, you know, interview, but it's also because we have a relationship, really shows like a perseverance in the face of like a tornado, like a whirlwind of emotion from him.
Well, no, man, I get it, man. That's a very, very intriguing and interesting analogy. And that's what it was, because I mean, I love the guy, you know, I mean, beyond the fact that he was this remarkable musician, he was a really decent, to me, in those early years. He was supportive, man. And, you know, like I said, I'd say stupid things to him and I'd cringe and he just laughed it off. And, you know, and I used the word before, and this was critical to Ed. It was about respect. And I would never write these words or say this sentence if I didn't truly believe it. He respected me. You know, and he felt comfortable opening himself up to me and saying those things to me. And I think I was good for his soul. You know, I mean, I was, you know, pretty insightful, and I had talked to so many musicians. I understood what made them what they are, you know. And yes, man, I wanted to hold on dearly to that friendship. And so, going back there, and again, if you haven't read the book, you won't understand, but if you've read the book, going to those interviews at Warner Brothers and him looking at me like a stranger. And honestly, I didn't use the description because I thought it was too brutal, but it was as if he had Alzheimer's, man, and he just did not know me. But I knew he knew me, and he consciously acted like he didn't know me, which was worse than if he chemically didn't know me. You know what I mean? And then I went back for a second interview, and it's like, yeah, you just can't understand, why that's happening. And for me, I've always had a pretty thin shell, a very thin shell. So it's like, what did I do? What could I have done that would have made him change like that? So yes, I did everything I could to try to hold on to that friendship. 7 years passed and I don't hear a word from him. And, I still hope against hope that it's going to happen. But yeah, it was really close, and I think we confided each other in a lot. And, yeah, man, trusted each other and respected each other. And, yeah, it was great until it wasn't, unfortunately.
I mean, it felt real reading it, and I think about, because I've known people the way I feel about how you described him is that, and you may have even said this, is that he was just a super sensitive person in that he felt everything. And in order to, and the times when he felt safe or comfortable, he would display that and make a connection or whatever it was. And when something would shut him down or make him feel threatened or something that maybe had nothing to do with you or anybody else, he would go the other way and just put this shield up, because someone who's that, like, who all the, like, everything is in their, like, on the surface of their skin, they just feel everything, and it's no wonder that he played the way he did, because it was just this frenetic energy of just constantly feeling that you have to, at some point, shut the door on that, even if it's for a day or a minute, just to save yourself. And the danger is you shut the door and it doesn't open again. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's sort of what happened, where I've known people who have developed and evolved or whatever and have figured out ways to be self-protective, and some are healthy and some are unhealthy, but sometimes we end up being casualties of those people's, and not even to pass judgment, it just that something in his brain might have said, well, this is an association with a part of my life that was so vulnerable and crazy that it's hard for me to go there. And had he tried, he probably would have realized that you're the same great guy to him you've always been, but he just shut that door and never opened it again.
Yeah, man. No, that's a really, really salient point. Edward, and I write about it, was an extraordinarily honest person. So, that honesty thing, yeah, maybe works the other way. If he felt cornered or unsure about something, he would retreat. And yeah, and maybe he didn't know how to get back. I don't know, but I can tell you, Edward a lot of times took the path of least resistance. And by that, I mean, he allowed other people to maybe make decisions for him. Management, Sammy Hagar comes in and brings his own manager with him. I mean, I don't get it. I just totally don't understand that. I mean, why would you do that? You know what I mean? And I might have said something peripherally to Edward, but it's not like I was saying, Ed, what the fuck are you doing? Don't let him come in with, yep. It just made no sense to me, or when he was looking for a singer, and I don't want to give it away, and he said, go find me a singer. I think he's half joking. He was dead serious, man. And if I had found somebody great, he probably would have taken that singer. Yeah. As if Edward didn't know or didn't want to or thought it was somehow smearing his artistry somehow to go look for a singer or to set up auditions or to listen to tape, you know? So I think Edward was maybe listening to people, I don't know, who maybe didn't have his best interests at heart, you know? I don't know. I don't know what went on behind closed doors, but yeah, I know that. Yeah, at a point in time, yeah, that door with him, he and I, started closing, and it was strange. So I mean, yeah, over the course of years, I could feel the door, kind of, closing, and then we have a conversation. One of the conversations we had towards the very end was really a pretty deep conversation, as if it was Alzheimer's in reverse, and he was now remembering again, and he was saying some very personal things to me.
Right.
So it was really hard to understand. But yeah, I think that there were things going on in his life that I really didn't know that much about it, unfortunately. His marriage and the deal on Warner Brothers and the situation with the band and the drugs and the drinking and, his health. So, I mean, part of me understands that. I mean, hey, I get it. Any one of those things would, could knock you over. But what I didn't understand is why all of that venom seemed to be directed at me. That's what I didn't get,
Yeah.
So, and that's what was hard to write about and hard to figure out and, look for a meaning for.
I wonder if, I mean, because you paint this picture of him that can be, I'll say it this way, that can be, can give because you are so comprehensive in the way you addressed all of the interviews you did and the information he gave you in those interviews and the things you say about him and your relationship, it gives the impression that this is a full picture of him. And yet, and as you even said, there are things you didn't know about his life or things that were going on and things that I, even reading your book or any other thing I've ever read about him or all the music I've heard, that I would certainly not know, and certainly less than you. It makes me wonder, there must have been other people in his life that he kind of did the same thing to, where he was like, well, that phase or that person or that relationship has to be done with now, whether it was somebody giving him advice on that or him, going through all the, was it like Buddhist stuff or meditation or therapy or all the things that he worked on to try to find a more peaceful place within him. That just is like, and that to me, if it's not just you, then in some ways it's not you at all, because it was like this decision that affected so many facets of his life because he needed to start the next chapter or whatever you want to say.
Right. No, I absolutely believe that. Yeah. I don't think I was the only one that got pushed aside. Yeah. Well, I mean, years earlier, though it was probably for different reasons, Michael Anthony is booted out of the band, and that must have hurt terribly for Mike. I mean, look, I've said some things about Mike. Excuse me. I didn't know Mike that well. I did interview him back in the day for the book. Mike and I got along great. Edward loved the guy. But somewhere, Edward felt that, Mike wasn't doing what he should have been, and brings in his son.
Yeah.
It's Ed's band. He can do whatever he wants, but, I don't know, was that part of that, cleansing thing? I don't know. That was pretty early on. I often wondered the same thing, Nick, and there's a little bit in the book. One of our last conversations, and it's funny because I never remembered asking Edward this. And as I was writing the book, I thought about this, and I thought, oh, I never asked Ed about this. But as I'm coming across one of these tapes, I realized I did ask him. And that is, Edward starts going to that to the Swami, the and getting more into Buddhism and becoming more self-aware. And, it's around that time when I asked Ed, where I go, Ed, this is after the relationship had kind of splintered and I hadn't seen him for a while. And I said, man, I hope the reason that, you kind of stopped hanging out with me or saying, I forget the exact words I used, I hope it wasn't because, we would get high together, or you thought that if I was around, you were going to get high again. He goes, no,
right,
no, man,
right.
it had nothing to do with that. I go, you're sure? He goes, yeah. I mean, I didn't think I was his trigger because certainly he was doing drugs way before me.
Yeah.
But, just to hear him say that, it's like, that made me feel better because I didn't in any way want to think that I was doing that or being that trigger. So after he said that, I mean, I felt good about it. But then I thought, well, okay, that's not the reason. Then what is the reason?
What is? Right.
Exactly. So, but I know Ed did push other people away during that same period. Absolutely.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to, you brought up something I want to kind of get to in a second. We're coming up on a halfway point here. And so we're going to take a little break, everyone out there in the land of podcasts, and get back. I want to ask you a little bit about the tapes. And I also want to kind of illustrate some other parts of the book that I found absolutely fascinating. So hang out.
Cool.
We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Hey, so I was going to do the usual and just list all of the links that I'd love for you to check out, but I realized that everything you need to know and everywhere you need to go is at nickdimatteo.com. That really is the hub. I list all the links in every episode just in case, but nickdimatteo.com is where I put everything that I do. If you want to know more about this podcast, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre or wherever else the podcast shows up, or if you want to support the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, just go to nickdimatteo.com. It's all there. If you want to check out my full discography of original music and covers for my band REC, REC, and beyond, it's at nickdimatteo.com, including all the streaming and social links for wherever you listen to music and wherever you check out your soch. My acting clips are there. My voiceover clips are there. Graphic design, my blog, and most especially, it's the best place to contact me. If you go to nickdimatteo.com/contact, or just hit the contact is on every single page. You can send me a note, say hello, ask me any questions you'd like. You get a newsletter a few times a month. And if you have a project of your own and need work done for it, whether it's audio editing or music or voiceover or graphic design, or if you have an event and you need live music, go to nickdimatteo.com, contact me, say hello, let me know what you need. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. All right, we're back. Back with Steve Rosen, author of TONECHASER, his relationship with Edward Van Halen. And right when we left off, you were mentioning how you discovered something that you didn't remember saying to him. And it brought up something I wanted to ask you earlier, which was, it must have really felt like a time warp to have those tapes and to hear the two of you talking and rediscover some, but fully discover things you'd just forgotten about.
Absolutely. I mean, so all told, there were probably, I think there were 40 or 50 tapes. I mean, there were a lot of tapes. I had tried, I write about it famously or infamously in the book, I had tried to be a careful historian and archivist. And I thought I was good at I did that interview on September 14th, 1985. And I would mark the cassette, because these are cassettes, right? Yeah. I thought I marked the cassettes carefully. Well, I didn't do a very good job. So half the cassettes I had were unmarked. They said Edward Van Halen on them, but there was no date. So yes, those tapes were the memory jogger. So I had the tapes in a rough chronological order. So hopefully, and every tape was numbered. So tape number 10 to 11, 12. So 10, I'm assuming, was the earliest chronologically. So I go to listen to that and go, oh, yeah, that's the first interview I did with Edward, the phoner, in early 78. And then I listened to the next tape thinking, well, that's going to be, later in 78, 79. And that tape could have been from 1984, man.
Oh.
And I'd have to listen to the tape long enough to hear something that would trigger something in me to know, oh, he's talking about Jump. So that's, 1984, or that's, track from the second record. That's, 1981. So yes, so there was that to contend with. And yes, it was a remarkable feeling to go through because honestly, yes, some of the tapes had been transcribed and appear as interviews in magazines, but most of these interviews had never been transcribed. Excuse me. And in fact, I had never listened to them since the day they were recorded. So we're talking, what is 1980, 50, 45? I can't do my math,
43 years. Yeah.
43 years ago. So, I'm hearing this stuff. I'm going, oh my God, I didn't remember asking him that, or oh my God, did I really ask him that, or wow, what a great interview, And I also write about sort of discovering what I would ultimately call the Twilight tapes. Those were the more personal discussions Edward and I had, where it wasn't us sitting down for a specific interview for a specific magazine, where I had a list of questions and that type of thing. These were just conversations that we would have typically late at night, which is why I called them the Twilight tapes. Edward would call at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and he just wanted to talk. And those moments were amazing. And I didn't remember a lot of the conversations on those tapes, and hearing that was amazing. Some of that stuff was really hard to listen to. But yeah, man, every tape was like this, opening a vault with uncovering something new. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe how much really amazing stuff there was there. And when I started hearing this stuff, I go, wow, there really is some amazing stories here. And, I think I think they will make a pretty great book, So,
right.
Yeah.
And something that you'll all discover if you read the book, which you should, is that it's not just transcriptions. The interviews themselves are not just transcriptions of what has already been published. You transcribe like pretty much and things that weren't published as well, right?
Exactly. So yes, so I sit down with Ed and we talk for an hour and a half. Well, only an hour's worth of stuff will fit into the format of the magazine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the rest of that stuff I just sort of would be editor and I cut that stuff out. So all of that stuff is in there, and probably a lot of stuff that was left that was probably a little off subject. Which wouldn't have made sense putting in Guitar World magazine, for instance. Mm-hmm. But now fans, reading that, that it becomes really interesting kind of stuff. And again, within the interviews, I comment on the interview and, me asking a certain question. And I try to describe physically what's going on. I have, my little parentheses, inserts, Edward lights another cigarette, or Edward, snorts another line and I snort with it, or, whatever it is.
Right,
so
right.
People can really be inside, 5150 or my living room, kind of sitting there on the couch with us as they read.
Yeah, it felt that way for sure. And it was funny that it came up a lot where he would say, don't print this, and he was trusted you enough to know that he's not going to print this. And then, of course, now years have passed and it's a whole different context. And it's fascinating to hear, like you said, the internal, strife of the band and anything else that obviously you wouldn't want to print at the time. It shed so much light on the trajectory of the band in context, and then just kind of zooming out and seeing, well, I was a huge fan of Van Halen from at least the very early 80s, maybe slightly before then. And when 1984 came out, it just, blew me away, because I was a keyboardist at the time, and I was like, oh, holy shit, you can do this. Wow. And you can do something other than just, piano ballads. And then David Lee Roth leaves. And I mean, I followed his solo career for a year or two, and that was fine. I enjoyed it, but I was always really confused about, how at the height of, when they hit this and everything seemed to be going so well. And people kind of got the idea of what might have been happening over the course of the next few years. And everyone has their opinion of Sammy Hagar and all of that other stuff. But what you showed was, like you said, even from as early as 78, there were questions about the dynamics of the band.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. You could almost use those things when he says, do not print, or don't use that, as the stepping stones. Because those were the moments he really didn't want revealed at the time. Yeah. And if you look at that, you certainly have a better feel for why Dave left, or that thing wasn't working after 1984. And you hit it on the head, and I'm hoping people understand that. I mean, had I not, and I could have done this, and it would have been the easy way out, I could have left those bits out where Edward says, do not print. But I think by doing that, one, I wouldn't have been honest, and two, it like you say, it reveals so much about him, that this is stuff he didn't want printed, that you realize, wow, that is the really important stuff. And had I not put do not print, you still might have thought it was cool, but you never would have had a sense of how really important it was, So, by putting do not print, including that in the text of the book, I think it's shining a spotlight on Edward, saying, yeah, this is what I'm going through. I can't tell anybody this. I don't want you to tell anybody. But again, use those moments in the book, and you can see, maybe what led to, I'm not saying it's an exact direction, but you can maybe understand, what was happening with Mike, and, ultimately, and Dave, and that kind of thing. Because you have to remember, when Ed is telling me things, I am pretty positive there's not another journalist in the world who he's ever told that. I mean, I'm 99% positive, So,
and that, I think that those moments of do not print kind of have a double effect of creating this intrigue of, well, here's a behind the scenes look at what was happening, but at the same time kind of emphasizing the fact that you had a genuine relationship with him. And like you said, you don't know if he told anybody else those things.
That's exactly right. Actually, if I thought about it, Nick, that's what I would have said. That's very, very cool. Absolutely, man.
Yeah. It was great.
It's funny. I only had one person who mildly said, well, why would you print that stuff, when he said, do not print? And, I tried to explain it as I just explained. I said, we're talking 40 years after the fact. I think a lot of it is common knowledge now. But I wanted you to know that those were private parts for Edward, and I think they had to be there in my book, and that's why they're there. So, but I've only one person ever kind of made that comment. Everybody else was still like, wow, man, that's cool that you would put that. Edward said, do not print. I mean, they got it, like you did. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I want to get to a whole other part of the book that I absolutely love, but before I have one more question sort of related to this, which is, do you know if anybody from his circle has read this book, like Wolfgang or any of his wives, or
That's the $64,000 question. Look, I mean, Wolf is pretty active on social media. I mean, is he aware of the book? I mean, I think so. I don't know at all. Has he read it? I doubt it. I mean, let's put it this way. I've certainly never had an order from Wolfgang Van Halen, right? I mean,
Right.
or anybody, I mean, I probably, that I would have recognized as working in the, Van Halen camp.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think anyone has read it. Does Al know about the book? I don't know how much he's, on social media or looking out there to see what's going on. I mean, Wolf might have told, Uncle Al about it. Has Valerie read it? Probably not. And I've said this before, Wolf, I have this fantasy that the phone's going to ring one day and it's going to be, Wolf's going to call me. And the conversation will be something like, look, I've heard about your book. I haven't read it. I don't think I want to read it. I'm assuming here, but the truth is, I guess you knew my dad for a very long time and you knew him back, before he was, a big star or before the first record came out, and maybe you could tell me some things about my dad that maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
And, I think about that and I think, wow, what a wonderful conversation that could be, because obviously he loves his dad. They had a remarkable relationship. But I did know obviously I knew his dad before he did.
Right.
And I knew his dad years before he did.
Yeah.
I don't know. Part of me thinks, well, that would be something intriguing for him. But, people might say, don't talk to Rosen, don't go there. I don't know. But that's my fantasy about it, and one last caveat, the last thing I ever wanted to do, and if I thought I was doing that, I would have cut those parts out, was try to hurt anybody in the Van Halen camp, embarrass anybody, discredit anybody. I think it's the opposite. To me, it sounds like a 580 page homage to my friend and the greatest guitar player who ever lived. I was afraid of going too far the other way, and yes, there are some pretty personal moments in there when Edward says things, but I think they reveal a lot about him. I don't think that they're scandalous, or I don't think they're hurtful. I say those things. I reveal those things about myself. I'd rather not have the whole world knew I was snorting coke and drinking with him, but that's what happened,
Yeah.
So
yeah. I'll say two things. I don't think any of the content is objectionable on any level, and like you said, I think it's elucidating and just in the way it does, pay homage to him because of how insightful it is in many ways. And anything to me that came off as there was something negative you said was so put upon you and your perception of the relationship that unless you're not paying attention, it's impossible to take that the wrong way. I feel like you'd have to be actively looking for a fight to read this and say, oh, this is a takedown piece, or like it's not even, it's so far from that.
That's cool, man. I'm really happy to hear that. Noel Monk's book, Running with the Devil, which is a very good book. I don't know if you know, or not that you would know, I was actually approached by Noel to write that book. And, this was, God, I don't know when Noel's book came out. I don't know, years and years and years ago. And I believe he had sent me some rough drafts or some notes he'd had. And I saw the type of book that he wanted to write. And I didn't want to be a part of that, So he brought in another writer. I can't remember the writer. He did a really excellent job. It's a good book. But I guess I started to look at my book and I look at what Noel's book did. And my God, to me, that's like, wow, that's pretty nasty stuff. Even if all that stuff did happen, and there's two sides to every story. There's Noel's side and Edward's side, in the band side. It's like, my God, wouldn't the Van Halen camp have gone gunning for Noel? I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
I don't know.
Right.
So
So if they didn't go for him, why would they come for you? Like,
yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, so this is a great time to pivot because there's a part of this book that I want everybody to know about. You're a musician, I'm a musician, and music lovers and all of that. And as much as I was absolutely fascinated by all the personal story and getting to know him and getting to know you and your relationship and all of that, there was also so much information about the music itself and his approach and things that I won't say I've been a rabid fan of Van Halen. I full disclosure, I kind of checked out after David Lee Roth left and have only recently listened to the rest of their catalog just to kind of catch up and see how things went, and especially really compelled by your book, and yet to hear some of the things that he said sort of casually, like I have a quote here that says, I love mistakes because you can never redo them exactly the same. And oh, wait a minute, my page got off. And a lot of times some good shit comes out. One of my favorite, that is one of my favorite things about the recording process, and something I had to learn along the way doing my own music is those mistakes can be golden. And to know that somebody like Eddie Van Halen, I'm listening as a kid and I'm like, he's inhuman. Like, how in the hell is he doing all of this? Is saying, well, some of that was just, flying off the cuff and it happened and I left it in. Or he even mentioned at some point in his career, he started comping solos. And I just had this conversation with a bandmate of mine who's like, I needed to get it perfect in one take. And I'm like, but why? If what comes out, and what I love about the way Eddie approached music was he understood that the way you put together a song is what matters the most, that the context of what you're playing isn't going to matter at all if the song sucks. So if that means you need to comp something, or you leave a mistake in because it works, or you don't, or you're working on coaching the vocalist or whatever else it is, I, first of all, had no idea he was that intimately involved in the creation of the music. As a kid, I just thought, oh, he's the pyrotechnics guy and that's it, But my God, like, he crafted everything really in you can almost say, I mean, other than lyrics, mostly. And I'm telling everyone out there, throughout the book, there are these nuggets of information about the music. And you're here, someone who got to hear some of that shit before anybody else ever heard it, before it was even done, and writing together and everything. And I'm just like melting. Like I have chills all over my body, even just talking about it. Cause as a writer and singer and all that, I'm like, if I could ever come close to doing anything with any of my heroes, I might have to have a defibrillator put in because it would just kill me on the spot.
Yeah, I get it. Well, that's cool, man. Yeah. There were some remarkable moments, and yes, Edward tossing out a line about mistakes, and I was going to fix it, but then I didn't know if I could duplicate it, which he loved. I wish I had pursued those moments more, but you're in the middle of an interview, and it's like you don't think about it at the moment. It's just a line, like but it stands out for you. And now I think about it. Yeah, it is brilliant. And yes, we know that Edward Van Halen was an astonishingly good guitar player. We all know that. We know that he built his own guitars and played his own guitars. His sense of composition, and people say, "Oh, he wrote great riffs," and he did, but it was so much more than that. And it was these things you're talking about. It was just, his feel, at the same time that it was so, my God, his sense of rhythm was just unbelievable. It was remarkable, but it also had this loose organic thing, and the riff sounded, not sloppy, but just, so organic. And there were little mistakes here and there. I just think a lot of that part of him gets overlooked, that it's not just these riffs, it was just his sense of harmony, and putting the sections together, and the way that he, sussed a little chord to go into the B section, or the next time that verse rolled around, before he started, layering a multi-tracking guitars, the second time the verse came around, it'd be a little bit more accent on the riff, or the riff would become a little more, uh, you know, uh, complex, more notes and stuff. I mean, that stuff, and you think about when he was doing that, my God, he was amazing. And then you hear a record like Fair Warning, where he's had all the time he wants now to really orchestrate guitars, and you hear those parts, and you hear the two lead lines going on in a rhythm part, and wow, it's pretty unbelievable. Yeah, but the mistake thing, that was the whole thing. I think in there somewhere I say, Ed, did you learn? I forget exactly how I phrased the question. Did you learn how to become a better writer on the second record from the first? And he goes, well, that sounds like, a formula thing, and he was like, he was offended by that. With him, it was always like you said, man, it was just kind of going for the throat, and just kind of wandering somewhere new and really not thinking about it. And if I said, Ed, yeah, you're maturing as a songwriter, I don't think he liked that at all. With him, yeah, it was always this organic thing, this never thinking about it. Yeah, mistakes be damned. Yeah, he was unbelievable. And you talk about, yes, hearing those tracks unmixed. He'd come over to the house, playing me, tracks from the second and third record and some of the fourth record. And there was, I think, pretty positive they were drums. I don't even know if there was a bass part on it. There was certainly no vocals. And again, I write in the book, I've always wondered, did he bring those over because he really wanted me to hear the guitars naked like that, or were the vocals not yet recorded? I believe he wanted me to hear the guitars unadorned, and then you can really hear it. It's like, oh my God! And then when he would play this stuff, sitting in my living room in the little Hollywood Hills guest house up on Weepaw Way, and whether he was plugged into one of my little amps or just playing the electric acoustically, and you'd watch him and you go, oh, holy God, this is just, you realized how remarkable he really was. I mean, I ran out of adjectives. I mean, but when you're watching him up close and you're watching his fingers and the way he's attacking the strings and bringing out the accents and things, it was just unbelievable, it was unbelievable. I mean, yeah, it was all of that made us understand or have a sense of why Edward is sort of here, and there are other brilliant guitar players, but none of them are quite there. Look, I'm not talking about Jeff Beck or Jimi Hendrix or some of these, but a lot of other insanely good guitar players never quite got the reaction from listeners that Edward did. And why? I think it's just all these things that we're talking about here, a lot of unspoken things, and you just feel these things when he plays that you don't feel from other guitar players.
Well, when you explain it that way, it makes more sense now looking back that you're talking about nuance in his playing where the end of one, verse would be slightly different or whatever, that those kind of instincts would be awoken by somebody who wasn't just, a hatchet man or whatever, someone who's just out there riffing, who understood that it was riffing for a purpose and that it needed to lead to something. And I'm sort of repeating myself, but that idea that he had in mind, well, it was fitting in this way in the song. And so maybe often without even thinking about it was like, well, my body's telling me that it needs to do this before I get to the next pre-chorus or whatever it is. Now I can see it. Now I can hear it. Now I can hear that, of course, he was like, I assumed, they hired a keyboard player for 1984, I had no idea, oh, holy shit, that was him, and I heard later stuff and him playing, and I guess even some of the bass parts, that he said that he tracked. I'm like, oh my God, virtuoso, just up and down.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Edward, it was always about the song, and it was always about a vocal song.
Mm,
Edward never had a desire, and he'd been asked, "Hey, Ed, go do an instrumental record." And he said, "Why? I do everything I need to do in Van Halen." So he was always aware that a vocal was going to go on top, but I don't think he ever laid for that. I don't ever think he wrote a part because he knew the vocal was going to be there. I mean, he just had that
right,
sense of it. Um,
right,
and today's credit, and Edward said it, a lot of the songs that Edward wrote probably weren't the easiest for Dave to come up with a lyric and a melody, and so I give Dave a lot of credit for, coming up and finding those little melodies that would fit in between what Edward was playing on a verse and finding something that would work over those kinds of, weird rhythm sections and stuff. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of other players were guitar players first and songwriters second. And really, I mean, for Edward, the song was absolutely as important as the guitar. In fact, the guitar playing. In fact, I think he looked at his solos as kind of a, he wanted to play a great solo, but solos were live on those first records, right? It's not like he was lining for a solo track. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I've said that a lot on this podcast. I think because my primary function has always been singer songwriter. I believe that at least in this world of music, there's plenty of jazz and all that other stuff that whatever you do should serve the song. If what you're creating are songs, it should serve the song.
Yeah.
It's like a really good looking person with giant hair that doesn't match their body. It's like, okay, your hair is great, but it's not really fitting in the whole picture, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to their music, at a very young age, was that I got this sense that, friends of mine who revered guitars and guitarists even way more than I do, because that's like my secondary instrument or tertiary, really. Um, would talk about Steve Vai and Satriani and all these people, and I'd be like, yes, of course, they're virtuosos, but I'm not feeling the hook in there other than just looking at them and saying, wow, you're really great, and again, he always had that purpose of, I mean, there were just some amazing songs,
Yeah.
throughout their career. And that's what I loved learning, this last couple of weeks, was listening to later stuff and being like, oh, wow, there's some good songs on the, the 90s albums and late 80s and all that too, and to know that craftsmanship was there, again, like you said, puts him in a different category from other guitarists.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why that whole thread thing. I mean, some very good guitar players, but yeah, those guys were guitar players first. I mean,
Right. Right.
and a lot of them were not great writers, of instrumental guitar tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could play their asses off. I wish I could play guitar like that, but yeah, songs themselves, you know. Yeah, Ed, just a great, yeah, to be that amazing of a guitar player and a songwriter, an orchestrator, um, you know, that's rare. I mean, he was a rare one for sure.
And when it's sort of further illustrated by the fact that it's pointed out a few times that, yeah, he made his own guitars and he was very particular about how they were made and anything, but he wasn't precious about the instruments. And
Mhm.
it was always, like you said, I mean, it's the title of the book. It was always about tone
Yeah,
and getting what he needed out of the instrument, and it just served a purpose, a tool. And I know so many musicians in general, but guitarists in particular, who are so precious about everything they own. And listen, if it's because this sounds better on this song, I totally get that. But if it's because it's an object,
yeah,
I'm not interested in that. And that made me love him even more, because I'm like, this is somebody you'd think who'd be like, well, I polish this every day, and it's something I give it, and it's Lucille or whatever, and all that
yeah.
stuff. And he's just like, no, I turn this knob like this and turn this one like that. I keep tweaking it till I get the right tone, and then I just go to town. That's beautiful to me.
Absolutely, and then I write about the story about him coming over with the two Les Pauls and putting the cigarette in the headstock of that 159. I'm thinking, oh my God, he just really doesn't care, and dumping him on the couch, and they almost bump into each other, and going up to 5150, man. And he had that V that's on the cover of I think it's a 1984 issue of Guitar World, my first cover on Ed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that V back then was a really valuable guitar, and it's sitting on the floor, and the floor is filthy, and there's cigarette butts and empty, beer cans, and the guitars, half of them aren't in the stands, and they're laying over the console. Yeah, he was always like that, man. And when he would come over with a guitar, it was never in a case. I'm talking about his main guitars, the Bumblebee. I mean, I don't even know if he owned a case. He did. I'm being facetious. But yeah, man, he just did not care.
Wow.
And famously, he would butcher some of his earlier instruments. I think it was that Destroyer he butchered. He said,
Oh, yeah.
I said, did it alter the sound? He goes, yeah, man, totally fucked that up, That's
Right.
and him doing those things to his amps. And God, he was just, and I've always wondered, so he's a tone chaser. Was he hearing this sound in his head, which he would describe as the Brown sound? And so that means, when he got the Marshall and, the attenuator and built his own guitars with the one pickup and put the pickup into the body, was that a fulfillment of that sound he was hearing? Or was it building a guitar, hearing it, and then pursuing that sound and defining it? You know what I mean? Either way, it's brilliant.
Good question, though. Yeah.
You know what I mean? To build your own guitar is one thing. To play the guitar is another thing. And to have the guitar sound like that, oh my God.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, you listen to his sound on that first record. I mean, it's monstrous. No one ever had a tone like that. You can hear every single note that he plays. And I love the fact that he.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well,
no,
that he. Go ahead.
No, that he didn't at that point wasn't double tracking or anything.
No,
he even said, "Don't put rhythm underneath a solo." Or
I know, absolutely. Which is why I really love that first record. Cream is one of my favorite bands, and obviously Cream on those early records, there was never rhythm tracks under the pillow. Although there were some, even on the first Cream record. But with Ed, it was just I'm sorry.
No, that's amazing. Yeah.
Just puritanical thing, and it was just just the tone and just the feel and everything was a pretty amazing first record for sure.
Yeah, that blew me away. So we're kind of coming up on time pretty soon. But I wanted to ask a couple more questions, and one is, you're I guess I mentioned you're a musician, and you've recently released something, a band, an album, Highway Sentinels.
Yeah.
And
Highway Sentinels.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Tell people about that.
Yeah, man, I'm really proud of that. So my friend Jimmy Waldo, Jimmy was the keyboard player in Alcatraz. That was a band that Yngwie Malmsteen was in, and then Steve Vai, and then Danny Johnson. He and I have been writing songs since the mid-'80s. His manager, Giles, heard some of these songs that we had done back in the day, and he liked them. And these were songs that I would bring in different singers, people that I knew to sing.
Mm-hmm.
I had written lyrics and melodies. And, they were good songs, and I wanted to stop them. I tried to get publishing deals and never could. So Giles said, look, man, if you can kind of update them a little bit, make them a little more modern, he says, I could probably go get you a deal. So Jimmy and I spent a couple of weeks. We took the tapes, and I actually, put on some rhythm guitars. because I hadn't played on any of those original songs. I brought in guitar player buddies, kind of, to do that. And so I put on some rhythms, and then Jimmy took it, and redid drums, and ultimately brought in a live drummer, Mark Zonder, really great drummer who plays with the band called Fates Warning. And David said, look, I've got this singer, David Reese. David was a singer in a band called Accept, latter-day version of Accept, the German band.
Okay.
And so David wrote new lyrics and melodies. I brought in some of my buddies. So Joe Satriani did a solo. Paul Gilbert did a solo. Bumblefoot did a solo.
Yeah.
This guy, Larry Flint, from a band called Riot, did a solo. Incredible guitar player.
My God.
Tracy Guns did a solo. And not to be outdone, I actually did a solo on one song. I said, dude, I've got to play one solo. And I goof with the other guys. I wrote all these guys letters. I go, listen, guys, you guys played amazing solos, and I did one. So don't be ashamed if I blow you away, Just kidding. But anyway, yeah, man, I was really happy with that. If anybody wants to go check it out, yeah, Highway Sentinel, The Waiting Fire. It's really a good record, man. There's some good stuff on there.
Yeah, it's everywhere. I listen to it. Just in the minute we have left, some of my favorites from it are Victim of the Night, We Won't Be Forgotten, How to Be Real, Hell in a Handbasket.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I had to write those down because I really enjoyed it. And yeah. And so is there anything in the 30 seconds, that you want to leave people with, place to go or thoughts or anything?
Well, I mean, I would ask one thing. If you could leave a review on Amazon, please do so.
Excellent. Yes.
And anybody, I make myself pretty available to everybody on Facebook and Instagram. Man, if you have any feelings or any thoughts about the book, you read it, let me know. I love hearing that stuff. If you didn't like the book, I don't want to hear it. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, man, yep. I mean, I'm in the second edition now, and that's going incredibly well. And I can only say thank you to everybody out there for supporting the book and believing in it. Thank you, Nick, for having me on and allowing me to talk your ear off, man.
It's been an absolute pleasure. ToneChaserBook.com, everybody. We're going to be cut off soon, so I will say goodbye to all of you. Thank you for watching and listening. Music, conversation, and connections, always my objective. And thank you so much, Steve, for being here.
Very welcome, Nick. Thank you, man.
Absolutely. Thanks again to Steve Rosen. It was an absolutely wonderful conversation to have with him. And I urge all of you to go get his book at ToneChaserBook.com. And thank you always for watching and listening. And please, again, if you'd like to see the bonus episode, my take on Van Halen and their career and some more thoughts about the book, please go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll talk to you next week.